So the national championship is in the books, and Georgia blew the doors off of TCU. Today, we need to break this down. We need to talk about where I was right, we need to talk about where I was wrong, and we need to answer some questions. First and foremost, did TCU deserve to be there? And secondly, where does this place Georgia? Before we can jump into all of this, y'all know the drill. I have got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no. Are you surprised by the outcome of this game? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it, and if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions may not seem big, but they truly are massive to content creators such as myself, and both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm, and we're on a push to 20,000 subscribers, and I'd love nothing more than to have you a part of this unbelievable community. But having said all that, let's jump right into this, and I'd love to start with where I was right and where I was wrong, and we'll start with where I was right. I'd pick Georgia to win this game. And I was operating under the assumption that there was a possibility that Kendre Miller could play. Kendre Miller for TCU was a big piece that was missing. He accounted for 1,400 yards on the ground, and even with him playing, I was talking about how this would be a massive test for TCU. Taking on Georgia is a completely different task than taking on Michigan. As impressive as it was, what TCU's 3-3-5 defense was able to do to Michigan's power rush attack, Georgia is a completely different beast altogether. Why? Because they have so much more balance on offense. With Michigan, if you're TCU, you take away that power rush attack and then you're gambling on McCarthy beating you with his arm. When you're talking about Georgia, you can take away their rushing attack. You still have to worry about Stetson and them throwing it all over you. If you are able to hamper their passing attack, they'll just run it down your throat. Todd Monken called a beautiful game. For probably the past 3 weeks, I've been here on the channel screaming to the hills that Todd Monken is not getting the press he deserves. He has been phenomenal this entire season. This Georgia offense has had an answer to everything, and the balance they play with makes them a really difficult offense to key in on for any defense. So where I was right, I picked Georgia to win this game. Where I was wrong was the score. I thought this would be around an 11 to 12 point margin in favor of Georgia, and it was anything but. In score being 65 to 7. And once again, I think Kendre Miller would have massively helped TCU, but it wouldn't have moved the needle. Georgia would have still won this game in spectacular fashion because they went out there and played with their hair on fire, and it was really impressive to watch. At the end of the game, Stetson Bennett over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns accounted for through the air, 2 on the ground, and Georgia just straight up dominated. Over 330 yards through the air, over 250 yards on the ground, and then 2 picks to go along with it. Georgia was firing on all cylinders. So I was wrong about the margin. I was even wrong about TCU's offense being able to test Georgia's defense vertically. Now, in fairness to this point where I was wrong, I do believe Kendre Miller would have allowed for a bit more flexibility for TCU's offense, because even though I think DeMarcado is a very talented running back, he doesn't have 1,400 yards on the season. And TCU has a dangerous vertical passing attack, but they need the rushing attack to be able to open it up. At the point where they can't run the ball consistently, it's very hard to throw the ball deep on this Georgia defense. Even though, if you had to ask me right now, what's the recipe to beating Georgia? The defensive front is spectacular for the Georgia Bulldogs. I don't think running it into the teeth of that defense is the way to go. I think we've seen one recipe to beat Georgia. You have to test them vertically because Kirby Smart plays an NFL style of defense. He's going to ask his defensive backs to be in a lot of man situations, which means if you have talented wide receivers and if you can buy time for your quarterback, all much easier said than done, by the way. This is a massive oversimplification, and only a few teams truly have the recipe to be able to test Georgia in this fashion. You can test this Georgia defense, but TCU not having a consistent rush attack pretty much well eliminated any threat of a vertical passing a game. At the end of the game, TCU had 28 rushing attempts for 36 yards and averaged 1.3 yards a pop. Max Duggan had 10 attempts for negative 38 yards. And you saw the difference in physicality in the line of scrimmage. That Georgia defensive front pushed around the TCU offensive line. And then the most difficult thing about this is you were playing the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's get one thing clear. Let's give respect where it's due. And in no way when I'm talking about these points where I was wrong am I trying to discredit anything. Once again, I even picked Georgia to win with Kendre Miller being present. Without him, it was an insurmountable task. So this is a super impressive win. if you're Georgia. And now we need to start asking some questions. First and foremost, did TCU deserve to be there? And the answer for me is yes. Look, I'm not saying that you can't give me teams that maybe would have fared better against Georgia. You probably could. In fact, I know you could because we just saw Ohio State fare exponentially better against the Georgia Bulldogs. There are teams in college football that wouldn't have gotten beat in the national championship 65-7. But did TCU deserve to be there? Well, the answer is yes, they handled business. One of the things that makes college football incredibly is the meritocracy that goes into the regular season. The beauty of college football is that every single week matters. If you handle your business, there is a theory that you can make it to the college football playoffs, and that's exactly what TCU just showed us. Handle your business during the regular season, make it to the college football playoffs. And on top of that, not only did they make it to the dance, but they beat Michigan. So they deserve to be in this game. It was not the result anybody wants to say, and I know this might be an unpopular opinion given the fact that we just saw them get beat 65-7, but once again, I think there's a different question in, is there teams that could have fared better against Georgia? To which I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. We just saw Ohio State do it, so that's not even a question. But I don't think that that's a mutually exclusive question. Did TCU deserve to be there? I think the answer to both of those questions can and is yes. They handled their business during the regular season. They deserve to be there, and they beat Michigan in the playoffs, which really points out two things to me. First and foremost, it backs up something I talk about all the time. You can make it to the dance, sure. But once you get to the dance, it's an entirely different brand of ball being played. Ask all these teams that have made it to the college football playoffs. When you get to the dance, it is an entire different brand of ball that they are playing. The teams are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, they're more physical. And a lot of the things that they can do well, they do at the highest levels of football. And it's a consistent theme we're seeing in the game. And the reason number two is I support the 4-team playoff system. I think this year proves why 4 teams is great, because you had a Cinderella story, which is what everybody wanted for so long. TCU handled their business, they made it to the playoffs, and yes, this was the result, but inevitably it's good that we have teams that can see if you handle your business, you can make it to the dance. I think that's great for college football. But at the end of the day, it reinforces a few things. First and foremost, what the SEC does is incredible. And I know people are going to point to the fact that, oh, well, it was only Georgia that did this. No, that's not true. Let's break down what the SEC did this postseason, shall we? The SEC played the Big 12 champion, the Big 12 runner-up, the Big 10 runner-up, and the ACC champion. They went 4-0 in all of those games and outscored them 204-48. It's not just one team. I just gave you 4 teams that played some of the top teams in every other conference, and they shellacked them. The SEC has this sort of mantra. They have this reputation for a reason. This is why. This is why they have that reputation. Now we need to move on to the final point. Where does this put Georgia? I think an interesting conversation here, one that I'm super interested for all of you, though. Where do you rank Kirby now among active head coaches? Because personally, I put him at number 2 right now, right behind Saban. I think this vaults him ahead of Dabo Swinney. When we look at the level of dominance Kirby has been able to maintain in his career, whether that was an assistant or he coached top-tier defenses or now as a head coach, it is notable. It is impressive, and it's lasting. And that's what makes this Georgia team one to watch. That's what makes this conversation one to be had. Because with this Georgia team, this feels like this is a program built to be among the top programs in college football for a long time. That feels like what happened. And do you want to know why it happened? Because Kirby Smart looked at the present circumstances and did not wait for the college football playoffs to expand so that way he would be able to get in. He acknowledged that if he wanted to win national championships, he had to be the best team in college football. How do you do that? You beat Bama. You beat Ohio State. You beat these teams that make it. But specifically for Georgia, being that you're in the SEC, you beat Bama. Or at least you create something that can go with Bama, that can run with Bama. And that's what he did. He understood the status quo and didn't wait for the status quo to change to allow for him to more easily get in, because those teams don't win national championships. That's the reality of the situation. And I think when the 12-team playoff gets here, that's what we're going to see. those teams that wouldn't be getting into the 4-team format, they're not going to win national championships. Because there's levels. And that's why I always talk about the dance. Making it to the dance is impressive in and of itself, because once you get there, it's an entirely different brand of football being played. Can't wait to hear from all of you.